starting off, right? So starting my screen, sharing my screen. Yeah. Can you see my screen?
Yes, Anurag.
Yes. Okay. So see, so before I sort of go into the Figma thing, I just wanted to show you a nice sort of I wanted to show you guys a nice, like some give you some basic concepts of like a good design construct by showing you a real example, right? So this is the landing page. This is the home page of Zendesk, right? This is the when you go to zendesk.com, right? This is the first page that comes, right? This is basically the brand page, the most important page uh, that they have, right, on their website, right? Because this is where practically most of the traffic lands, right? For all of you who don't know what Zendesk is basically a B2B chat platform, right? And it is used by a lot of companies to basically drive customer support, right? So if you have ever worked with, let's say you have like an insurance with ICICI Lombard, right? And ICICI Lombard in turn would use Zendesk chat platform to basically offer customer support over chat, right? So Zendesk is a very large company. It's the leading company in this particular space, in chat space, right? And uh, and basically this is what their homepage looks like, right? So if you look at the homepage, can you tell me two or three constructs about what kind of principles have they followed to basically on this particular homepage? What are the key things you notice on this particular page? Anyone?
What they do and what their service offerings are,
Mm-hmm.
and
Right.
some trial.
Right. So if I had to kind of break down this page in terms of design, right, you would notice that the page is very simple, very clean. So it does not take a lot to basically make a nice looking page, right? The more stuff you put in, the more sort of clutter it creates, right? It is better to have a very clean, nice design, right? So the key, some of the core things you will notice is that obviously there is a margin from the left and the right, right? So basically, there is there is kind of a board, and on board they have basically set the stencil, right? They have created the left and the right margins, right? There are some. Then basically there is a top navigation bar, right, which is the top sort of row, right, in which again they have very clear spacing, right, and consistent spacing, right? And then basically there are only two large callouts, right? So there is one area which basically talks about what their brand positioning is, and then basically what is and on the right side what they have as the most important call out on this particular page, right? So what is it that they do really really well, and how can they drive sort of the key action that they want to drive, right? Which is basically get users to basically sign up for a free trial or basically look for a demo, right? And then the free trial is highlighted because that is like the primary action that the company wants you to do, and view demo is the secondary action, right? So if you look at any page, right, it does not take a lot to basically make it look nice and clean, all right? And basically the structure is very very simple. uh, you have some top navigation, right? Then you have like two or three large sections, right? So it could potentially be too large. So you can think of it almost like there is a line going through the middle, and on the left side you have like the brand positioning, and on the right side you have some basic details on what that brand positioning really really means, and then some call to action, right? This is pretty much it, right? And you go to any page, right? Any other large company's page, you will find this is how the typical structure looks, right? Everything is well aligned, right? The spacing is uniform, right? Exactly how you do it on the PowerPoint slides also. So spacing is uniform and everything is properly aligned, and that is how you basically do it, right? So, so today what I'm going to show you is show the same principles in a Figma context. Do a very basic wireframe, show you this exact same wireframe on Figma, right? And then after that, Lakshmi will take over and walk you through a very detailed landing page. Okay. So let's quickly get started. So I already have Figma over here, right? And the Figma might run a little slow because there are just way too many things running, right? but you can see, right? So basically all I did was just clicked on this plus button. If I click on the plus button, it gives me the option design file or FigJam file. You choose the design file, and once you choose the design file, basically this is the page you end up on, right? So a blank slate, a clean slate. Okay, clear?
Anurag, excuse me.
Yeah.
Right, actually, sorry. Hi, this is Gaurav, and sorry to disturb everyone. So, actually, I have just joined just a minute back. So, Anurag, actually, just let me know ki, this Figma tool is free or how to get it, because as being a product manager, I haven't worked on it. So, I just want to know basics of this. Is this a software version or this is something licensed version,
No,
or
it
we
is
can
not
get it?
licensed. It is free, which is why I have basically chosen it. You can obviously buy a license that allows you to do better collaboration with your team, and also some of the collaboration aspects, some of the more advanced aspects might be hidden behind a paywall, and basically a license. But the basic stuff, everything is free. Like you can pretty much do whatever you want to do if you are basically operating on it as a standalone sort of guy, right? So only when you start collaborating with your team and you have to share files around and you want maybe very detailed comments and stuff like that, only then you basically have to go for a license of sorts.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay. So the good part of using Figma is it's a very simple tool. Unlike in the past, the designers used to use very complex tools like complex tools from Adobe and all, right? And this basically now, because as a product manager, you are not supposed to do very visual looking screens, right? You can do very visual looking screens, but by and large, your focus is to basically lay out the structure of the screen and not really focus on some of the more sort of display niceties, right? Like make it look very jazzy and nice, right? So which is why a Figma, or for that matter, even a Balsamic works really well. Balsamic is another very popular tool, which is pretty straightforward, easy, works pretty nicely. So early on, I used to use Balsamic, but now I've moved on to Figma because Figma is also pretty nice. So so now very simple stuff, right? There are only 2-3 different menu options. The first menu option is basically one is the click and point tool, which you don't really need to worry about. This is basically for moving stuff aside. The first tool is important. This is a frame. This is the basic frame. So, for example, if you're designing for, let's say, web, right, or if you're designing for mobile, right, so this allows you to basically set the basic frame, how large the screen should be, and what the basic frame looks like. This you set by that. Everything else is basically a shape on that frame, right? So let's say you're creating a navigation bar, right? So ultimately it's a horizontal rectangle, right? Large maybe, right? If you're trying to basically create a few connectors, right, then basically it's a line, right? So everything else basically is a shape. Uh, this you can use pen and pencil, does not make much of a difference. Then there is like a text sort of menu option. There are certain comments option, and then a bunch of other options which you can look into. Pretty straightforward, nothing really fancy or complex, right? So the first step of any design, like I told you, is basically a frame. So you basically now we will insert a simple frame, right? So I choose a frame option, right? And the way it works is anytime you basically select a certain component, immediately on the right you will see what are the different properties of that particular component, right? So because we are going to design for desktop, in this particular case, we're trying to basically create something similar to Zendesk, right? So here are all the different desktop frames that are available to you. So let's just choose a desktop frame. So as soon as I chose a desktop frame, basically the frame got inserted. You can see it, right? Right. Now, what's the next step, right? The next step basically in any design process is what I was calling out on the Zendesk design, right? There has to be certain margins from the left and right? Because you have to make all the components aligned, you have to set up what we call as a grid, right? So I'll just show you something similar, right?
No, what is Zendesk? They have missed ID.
Yeah, Zendesk is basically, this is just a sample landing page I'm showing you. So this is Zendesk's home page, right? So I just wanted to sort of call out that most of the even the most important page, right, which is the brand home page of this particular company, and Zendesk is a leading chat platform. Basically, if let's say you have a policy from ICICI Lombard, right, and you basically want to get support over chat, right? So they would take Zendesk chat platform, basically integrate it into their website, so that then they can offer you chat support. So Zendesk is the leading chat platform out there. It's the biggest chat platform out there, and they are a very successful company, and this is their homepage, right?
Okay.
So yeah, I was just trying to call out a few design attributes from their homepage, just trying to kind of showcase and highlight that even the most important page, it does not take much to make it look nice. A simple navigation bar on top, everything properly aligned, some primary CTAs, and the brand positioning and the text basically explaining what that brand positioning is. One primary CTA, one secondary CTA, that's it, and that's it, right? So that's what we're trying to replicate here also, right? Something similar. So now we have introduced the frame. The first thing we need to do is basically set up a layout. If you don't set up a layout, you will not be able to align stuff properly, right? So in the frame, again, amongst all the different properties, you can see something like a layout grid, right? So I'm just going to add a layout grid. The way you add it is by basically clicking on the plus symbol, right? So as soon as I clicked on the plus symbol, you saw this 10 cross 10 pixel grid, right? But this is not how typically design is done. Design is typically aligned across columns, right? You don't really align across rows, right? And a typical construct in design, this is something probably you would not know, is basically we use a 12 column layout. So I'll show you what I mean. So I'm just clicking on this uh, grid option, right? I'm just clicking on grid and then converting into a column based grid. So immediately as soon as I converted it into a column based grid, you can see instead of the checks and the rectangles, sorry, the squares, you are basically now seeing columns, right? In column, what I'm going to do is, you can see the drop down here, the column, I'm going to insert a 12 column layout. Why am I doing this? Because see, what happens is, you look at any website, right? You will typically see something on the left side, something on the right side, right? Or you might see a 3 column layout. Most of the websites that you see in the real world are typically 2 column, or maybe it could be Zendesk like, which is like just one large thing, right, with all the different navigations, or it is typically a 2 column layout, right? On the left side there is some navigation, and on the right side there is the main content of the page. Or sometimes it's a 3 column layout. On the left and the right side there is navigation, maybe a blog page. Left and right side there is navigation, and in the center there is content, right? So you start with 12 columns because what it does, it allows you to divide your screen space. Even if it's a 2 column layout, you can divide it 6 6, right? If it's a 3 column layout, you can divide it 4 4 4, right? So 12 is very flexible in that particular case, because it allows you to divvy your space in 2 column layouts, in 3 column layouts, in 4 column layouts. 12 is divisible by 4 also. So even if you wanted to do like a very custom 4 column layout also, that also you can do, right? So 12 columns work very nicely. It's the kind of a standard construct and design. So typically we use 12. Let's say if you had to do, uh, let's uh, let's say a 9 column layout, right? If you choose 9, then you will not be able to divide it exactly into, because 9 is not divisible by 2. So if I had to do a 2 column layout, if you choose 9 columns, you will not be able to divide your space accordingly, right? So 12 is very flexible, and which is why we choose 12. Now, like you saw on the Zendesk page, I'm going to set a margin. So I will set a margin of, let's say, some standard margin, 140 pixels, right? And maybe we can also change the gutter space. The gutter is basically the spacing between all the different columns that you see. So we can increase, maybe make it a little less packed, right? Because on the Zendesk page also things were a little less packed, right? So we made it 30, right? So now you can see immediately there are 12 columns. There is even spacing from left and right, right? And there is some gutter spacing also between the columns also. I have increased the spacing, right? So this kind of sets up the template. This is almost a stencil that allows you to start putting some components on the screen. So far clear? Yeah.
I just want to ask what is a gutter spacing?
Gutter is basically the white space between the 2 columns. So left pink column, right pink column, the gap between those 2 columns is basically the gutter space. Because you don't want the columns to be completely packed, right? Otherwise, all the text will come very close to each other.
Right? Okay. And what is the space on the extreme left and right column?
that is called margin. That is the margin, like any normal page, right? Even if you are working on a normal pen and paper page, you set up some margins, right? When you, or even if you are working on Microsoft Word, so same concept.
Oh, sure. Thank you.
So 140 pixels margin, 30 pixels gutter, and then 12 column layout. 12 column is a very standard construct because it allows you to divvy up your space very, very evenly, be it a 2 column layout, a 3 column layout, or any fancy 4 column layout, 6 column layout. It works pretty nicely, quite flexible, right? So we are done with the grid. Now, just for the sake of making it look a little more nicer, I'm going to just give my frame a background color. So I'm going to this fill attribute. So the way you basically choose anything is basically, you can see that my frame is highlighted, right? The blue thing, right? So I'm going to fill and I'll choose some color. So let's say standard color picker, right? So let's say I choose a blue color. And on the blue spectrum, you have all kinds of possible variations. So I'm just going to kind of shift my bubble to something that looks a little nice, right? And that's it. So now I've given a background color just for the sake of it, right? So in Zendesk also there's a background color. So something similar I'm trying to do, right? What's the next step? The next step is basically inserting a navigation bar, right? So navigation bar is nothing but a rectangle. Everything practically is a shape. So I just go to the shape tool, choose a rectangle, right? And like any simple PowerPoint presentation, I think I just start drawing it, right? And it nicely snaps. And then you can maybe reduce it to something more, right? So this starts behaving like your navigation bar. If I select the rectangle, yeah, tell me.
Like after you set up all the 12 columns and all the margins, like you did something with the color, right? Like I missed it because on my internet. Like, can you please explain it?
Nothing fancy. So chose the frame. This is the fill option, right? You can see the fill option on the right.
Yeah.
So whichever component you want to work with, you just have to select it, right? So in this particular case, I chose the frame, right, which is desktop 1, right? And then I went to the fill option, right? Early on, it was all 0, 0 because it was all white. So when I clicked on this, right? When I clicked on this color picker came up, right? The color option, right? By default, it was somewhere here, right? All white, right? So what I did was, first you can choose the base color. So if I choose this slider here and here, I can choose the base color. So I wanted it to be blue. I love blue, so I wanted it to be blue. But within blue also, there is this gradient, right? This is basically the hex code basically is the reflective. So now within the blue spectrum, you can be towards white, you can be towards completely dark blue, which eventually becomes black, and you can be anywhere, right? So if I just slide it somewhere on this spectrum, within the blue spectrum, I get different colors, right? So I just keep shifted it to something slightly nicer, slightly light, which where I can still see my grid nicely. Basically gave it a background.
Okay.
Clear?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Then after that, I basically inserted a rectangle, right, which was from the shape picker, right? So the frame picker and the shape picker, right? And in the shape picker, because I wanted to create a navigation bar, so I just inserted a rectangle, right? Maybe gave it, right? And then you choose a rectangle, right? Either you can basically slide it the way you do it on PowerPoint, or you can also go to the properties of the shape, right? So in this particular case, let's say I want to give it a whatever height of 70 pixels. I just choose 70 pixels, and so 70 pixels. So you pretty much have the navigation bar ready, right? Next, we will create some components on the navigation bar, right? Similar to Zendesk, right? Because you have all these different products, pricing, etc., right? So you want to create the individual, and maybe you want to have a large sort of component for the Zendesk brand itself, right? So again, nothing fancy. Again, it's again a rectangle only, right? Everything is effectively a rectangle, right? So I take the rectangle and basically push it.
10 minutes.
10 minutes, May. Have you brushed?
Push it on within the nav bar, right? And the way to basically make sure that most of your stuff is evenly sized, what I'm doing is I'm aligning it with the,
Can you please do that once more?
sorry,
Can you please repeat this process? Like, how do you?
repeat this process.
Yeah, the smaller rectangle, like why?
Yeah. So I've removed the shape, right? See, the concept is very simple. You start with a frame, you set up the layout, right, which was the 12 column layout I did. Then then everything else practically is a shape, right? Because what is happening is, let's look at this, right? Even on top of the navigation bar, right? This is basically a rectangular shape, right? This button is a rectangular shape, right? So you are basically setting up some, again setting up some stencil on that frame to basically give you different components, right? So here the Zendesk sort of buttons are plain buttons, right? But I'm going to basically set up buttons like this, free trial all along, right? So let's just see how we can do it. So everything effectively is a shape. So first I chose the navigation bar, which is like a left to right running horizontal rectangle all the way through, because that is nav. And then all of the individual sort of components on the navigation bar, right? When I'm saying navigation bar, I'm referring to this top navigation, right? So, so everything effectively on the navigation bar is also a shape only, right? So I again go back to the shape tool, choose a rectangle and draw a rectangle, right? And that's it, right? And maybe I increase the height of it. So maybe I make it 35 pixels. And that basically becomes the first component of my navigation. And I'm just dragging here and there just to make it completely aligned, right? So this becomes like maybe a placeholder for your first component of the navigation bar, right? If you want to make it more fancy, and maybe we can change the fill of it again. So maybe again we go back, choose something maybe within the violet spectrum, so that it comes out very clearly. So this becomes your first sort of button, right? But the button is obviously not looking that nice, so we'll make it more fancy. So clear, right? So same thing I did on the frame. I again sort of change the color of this particular component. That becomes the first, maybe the brand logo. The brand logo is basically this component, right? Because we are just drawing wires, right? We want to communicate the idea to the designer. And then we call out on the design that, hey, buddy, this is going to be the brand logo, right? This is going to be the first call to action. This is going to be the second call to action. This is going to be the third call to action, right? Just showing you a few more properties on this. So let's say you want to make this brand logo really nice, right? So a typical sort of concept is basically making the corners rounded, right? So let's make the corners rounded. So maybe I'll put some radius, right? So you can see X, Y, width, height, right? All of those things you can see. This basically is the radius, right? You can see the corner radius, right? So maybe add some corner radius, right? So maybe make it 35, right? And you can see that the shape. So everything, the secret in web is everything is effectively a rectangle with some corner radius. Whatever shapes you see, right? Effectively everything is a box only, but the box basically has different corner radiuses to make it look like a circle or make it look like an oval or stuff like that, right?
Sorry to interrupt, Anurag. In the same page where the Zendesk is written, above that sign in, product support, company, contact us, English, there is something else written. So do we need to create boxes for that as well on the right top?
Sorry, Wasim, I lost you. Can you repeat it?
On the right top of the page, you can see sign in, product support, company, contact us, English.
No, I just kind of use this as a basic sort of reference point. Yeah, I basically use this as a reference point, but I'm not replicating everything exactly. I'm just trying to show you the process. Like if you wanted to, you could have another row on top and then another row which starts the navigation bar. It's fine.
Yeah.
Right. And again, like any other good software, Zendesk has similar shortcuts. So let's say I have to introduce another sort of call to action. So I just introduced, just hit Control D and just align it, right? Now here you see the benefit of using a grid, right? Because I have a grid, I can maintain equal spacing, right? And every time I'm basically using a component, I'm basically aligning it to the grid. right? So by basically aligning it with the grid, that is why the grid is important, right? The grid behaves like a stencil, right? And basically it allows you to position things very, very nicely so that the alignment is not out of whack and the design looks absolutely clean and proper. Yes.
From where we have taken this grid, actually I forgot that point to note it down. How have we selected this grid on the screen?
So basically the first component that you put in your Figma design is basically a frame, right? And if you choose the frame, the attributes on the right side, one of the attributes on the right side that you will see is a layout grid. Okay. If I have already added one layout grid, but if you did not have another, so let's say you want to add a fresh layout grid to this, so I can again do a plus on this and see it has added a new grid on top. So this frame has now two grids, the original one that I had added and the grid one. Now if I go to the grid one, this is exactly the process I followed the last time. I basically went to the grid, set columns, because design happens across columns and not in squares, right? And here I said that the most flexible grid is the 12 column grid, so I chose the count as 12, right? Then I set up some margin, right? So I basically, in this case, I did a 140 pixels margin, and because I wanted my gutters to be a little more nicely spaced, so I made it 30 pixels, and that is how we got this grid.
Okay, got it.
Anurag, I just forgot to ask you, like, what's the name of this website where we are making this practice grid?
The name of this website is Zendesk.
Okay. Oh.
Sorry. You are saying where I am making this design. This is Figma.
Yeah. This is Figma.
This is Figma. This is not. You can do it on the website also, but basically I've downloaded Figma and basically creating in this particular software.
So are these free tools or free trial tools, or we have to pay for using it?
Like I called out earlier, it's free for individual use. If you want to, let's say you are a proper big design team, right? So for a product manager, you can pretty much go with the free version. But let's say you are a large design team, because designers also use Figma, right? So if you are a large design team, you have to collaborate, right? Multiple people are going to collaborate on the same design. Then you need to buy a license. For all practical purposes, a product manager can get by using the free version of it.
Hi, Anurag. I'm Nimish Vishnoi. Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to ask, what are the benchmarks of these designs? Like, is there any secret or benchmark that the left margin should be this one, right margin should be this, or the font size should be this, so that your design appeals to the maximum viewers? Like there is something called golden ratio, right? So are there any benchmarks to this design also?
Yeah, definitely there are benchmarks for design, right? But this is not a design course, so I cannot teach you all the different benchmarks for design. For that, you need to spend a lot more time. For example, like I told you one secret, right? That we use a 12 column layout, right? That's a benchmark for design, right? For example, let's say on a mobile device, the height needs to be at least 8 pixels or 10 pixels, right? That's a benchmark for design, right? So there are a lot of benchmarks for design. But what I'm trying to show you today is basically just some basic concepts of wireframing. It will be hard for me to cover all the different benchmarks for design, because that's a full-fledged design course itself, right? So for that, and then there are different benchmarks of design for web, and then there are different. For example, there's a reason why I chose the 150 pixel margin, right? Because that's a benchmark for design. There is a reason why I chose my gutter as 30 pixels, because that's again like a benchmark for design, right? So those things, unfortunately, it will be hard to teach all the different benchmarks. That is something you get from practice and by reading up the guidelines, right? So when you are designing for mobile screens, there is a different set of guidelines enforced by the Android and iOS platforms. They are pretty detailed. You should look at the Android and iOS guidelines. For web, you should look at the human computer interface guidelines, CI guidelines, right? So there are a lot of guidelines. All it takes is another simple course to just go through all the different ratios and the pixel sizes.
Okay.
Fair enough? Right? So,
thank you.
Yeah. So, let's now create some smaller buttons, right? So, I'll just sort of drag this. And maybe on the right navigation, we'll choose some smaller buttons, right? Which are just one, sorry, something. One row wide. One second.